Hi, this is Amos Elroy. I'm from New Jersey, USA, and with me today is Troy Davis from Alsace-Lorraine, France, and we're going to discuss a concept we've been actually tossing around between us for quite some time, and I think it's about time to bring it to a larger audience and discuss the proposal and the possibilities. Hi, Troy.
Hi, Amos. How are you?
Good, I'm good. Well, within the constraints of the current state.
Yeah.
First of all, let's talk about this proposal and how it differs from all the previous attempts at negotiating peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Well, the uniqueness of this proposal is that it's based on a scientific understanding of human nature, and it's based on something which most people agree to, but in politics, but which has not been applied consistently and logically. And it's based on fundamental principles that we can go into later. And basically, it's the idea that you cannot have peace, or in this particular case, not necessarily in all cases, but if you want a robust, sustainable peace, it is important, especially in this kind of cases, that the people make peace. It's not just the states who must make peace. Now, in most peace processes, the states make peace. And if it works, okay, fine. But sometimes it doesn't work. In this case, it doesn't work for whatever reasons. And we can go into that later. So if we want to go deeper, the fundamental idea is how can we get the people of Israel and the people of Palestine to make peace? Because fundamentally, both peoples are traumatized. I mean, when I say traumatized, I mean literally psychologically traumatized for different reasons. And people will argue, well, I'm more traumatized than you are. But as an outsider, as an external person, we can see that people are traumatized. And when you're traumatized, it's very difficult to find a rational solution to problems. In fact, you can't. You can't. And this is kind of the fallacy of, let's say, the usual normal state-led process. Because state-led processes are based on the assumption that somehow we will conduct a completely rational, systematic process. It doesn't mean it is rational, systematic, but it's sort of based on that assumption, and that if we arrive at some kind of solution, the people will accept it. But if the people are traumatized, it's nearly impossible for them to accept it because they have not worked through their own trauma. And so this idea is based on what I call inventing or designing a psychopolitical process, a psychological political process, which allows people to directly or vicariously work through their own trauma over a certain period of time. We're not talking about a huge amount of time, but not just in a couple of days. The reason why, the Oslo Accords, Camp David Accords failed is for two fundamental reasons. First of all, they're just between a bunch of guys, could have been women, but those guys, they were guys, and negotiated by a bunch of diplomats. I wish they had worked, but they didn't. We have to be pragmatic. We have to accept reality. It didn't work. And they were done even though there were negotiations for a while before that. In the end, it came down to a clincher of a few days. So, in a matter of a few days, you're supposed to believe that a conflict which goes back decades and which has accumulated so much emotions and hatred is going to be resolved. That's impossible. Maybe the two parties, like the two or three people in the room, resolved it for themselves personally. But for the millions of people on the ground, it wasn't resolved. And in the end, that's why, and I'm not now making a value judgment on the actual content, even of the Camp David Accords, Oslo Accords, or any other accords. Okay, so if people start criticizing, yeah, but this accord was a bad accord, maybe. But the point is that even even if the accords had been perfect, quote unquote, from whatever point of view you want to take, the very fact that they were conducted in the way they were conducted means that the probability of them being accepted was quasi nil. So this concept is a way to design a process for the peoples to negotiate a peace. And the aim is to have what I call robust peace. Robust means that even if you have a few weeks or a few months of calm, you're not going to have it's going to stay for years, just like you have in the European Union. We have a robust peace. It's been going on for 75 years now, and there is no. I'm from Alsace, and we've been at war with Germany for over 1,000 years. And any time before, let's say 1950, if you had asked a person, one of my forefathers, do you think that there will be war again within the next 50 years? At any time in that history, people would have said, yes, of course, there's going to be war within the next 15 years, probably within the next 10 years or 20 years. But we've had the longest peace since the Pax Romana in Western Europe. And there is a reason for that. So that's what that's one of the inspirations, by the way, for what I'm suggesting here.
Troy, tell us about your background and how you arrived at this conclusion.
Okay, well, my background is my family, or at least my immediate family, my mother, my father, they're both activists, they're everyone on activists. They each have their Wikipedia page. My father was a founder after World War II, what is called the World Citizen Movement. So it was one of the most idealist movement of the 20th century. In fact, people can look him up. Recently, a couple of years ago, there was a French author wrote a book, talked to me about Gary Davis, and on the cover at the end it said, "Gary Davis, the last pacifist of the 20th century." So in a sense, he had, and when he died in 2013 in the New York Times, he was on the front page of the New York Times, which is quite unusual for, let's say, normal people. So that's the idea that he based his philosophy, actions on, is the concept of world citizenship, which basically means, it's very simple, that all humans on this planet should have equal rights. I mean, it's a very simple, fundamental idea. I think everybody can agree that if this were realized, if it were true, then most problems we have would be solved. And it's the fact that we do not have equal rights. For the American audience, it's as if we said it's equivalent of what was the civil rights movement in the 1960s. The civil rights movement was about giving equal rights to all citizens of the United States, whether no matter their race or whatever. Well, here it's like an extension, even though it predates the civil rights movement. But you could say it's like a global civil rights for everybody. So that's one, and that's the fundamental inspiration. And philosophically, the principles that I use are the principles that ground world citizenship. And there are two principles which I didn't invent, but which are accepted quasi-universally. The first principle is that all human beings are born equal and free in dignity and rights. Well, that's been taken, and I'm quoting the Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I shorten it by saying all human beings have equal dignity. So that's the first principle. It's hard to go against that principle. Some people do. Some people do. For instance, under apartheid South Africa, some whites said, the Afrikaners said, no, we have a higher dignity than the blacks. So they based on another principle. But this is rare. I mean, it's hard to today say for anyone to claim that, even if people think of it, to publicly say we are superior to others, it just doesn't fly. The second principle is based on also an article from the French declaration of the Déclaration des droits de l'homme et du citoyen of 1789, the French Revolution, which says that the people are sovereign. The political sovereignty belongs to the people. And here too, this is very fundamental. I mean, those are really fundamental. So what I based my theory on, and I developed a theory on how to apply this, are those two principles, which I call axioms, which, by the way, it's very important for people to understand. I cannot prove, and nobody can prove, that people have equal human dignity. It's not something you could prove. It's an assumption. It's an assumption. But you cannot, it's hard to actually based your politics on anything else other than this assumption, and also the assumption that sovereignty belongs to the people. Now, some people may say, no, sovereignty belongs to God. But even so, when I spoke to theologians and of all of not just Christians, but also Muslims, I asked them, so does this mean that do you agree to this principle, even though you believe that God is supreme? And the unanimous response was say, yes, even though we believe God, yes, God is supreme, but in the real world, there are people, and it's the people, the sovereignty belongs to the people because they're in the real world. And they ground it theologically, even though I'm not a believer, I mean a religious believer, they ground it theologically by saying God created man or people, humans, and so the sovereignty of God in the real world resides in the people. So those two principles are, this is where I'm coming from. On my mother's side, my mother was an environmentalist, a feminist, a pacifist, and she is also, she had an incredible life. She unfortunately passed away just a couple years ago. And so I'm also basing part of my action on what she did, because she created a school to train what I call eco counselors, so specialists for sustainable development. So this is one of the things that this is part of my greater project to create a school of democracy to train people how to apply those principles.
Yeah. So let's talk about how, with a 5,000 mile view, what would such an assembly or such a solution look like?
Before I say that, I just want to say that I did not set out to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem. I didn't. That's very important. Why? Because as a scientist, by the way, I didn't say that, but I'm educated. I was a physics major at Harvard, theoretical physics. And that was very useful because when you're a physicist, when you study theoretical physics, you have to learn not to put your own biases in. In fact, in general in science, you have to learn that. But in physics, it's even more obvious. So, but in politics, everybody has unconscious biases. So it's very likely, and I think nearly everybody who suggested some kind of solution to this problem, I think if they set out, just if one day somebody who's very smart sets out, oh, I want to solve this problem, or they come with their baggage, with their experience, also with everything they read, whatever they read from any side, okay? And even though they say, okay, I'm going to try to be unbiased and make a come up with something new, the overwhelming likelihood is that it will be a function, kind of a hodgepodge of things that they have already heard or read about in different proportions. It's like, they will learn all the ingredients, whatever. They will take all those ingredients and they will come up with some kind of recipe for peace, but it will be based on the ingredients, so to speak, the cognitive ingredients that they've assembled through their life. So I didn't do that. So in a sense, I'm happy because I was free of that, even of unconscious biases that would say, oh, well, I'm going to, because I think most people who want to solve this problem, they unconsciously have a predetermined notion of what the solution should be. And then in a sense, they work backwards. They work backwards to justify their pre-arrived notion, the goal, let's say one state, two state, or whatever it is. And then they try to justify it with whatever reason. And you can justify whatever the end goal is, you can find justifications for it, which are logical, so forth.
Think that we share that kind of thinking, me as an engineer, an ex-engineer, and you as
Exactly.
well. We think of things systematically, as if you and also if you look at nature, where you have rules that are set for evolution or for other processes, and then things fall into place based on those rules. And if those rules are set, if the system is set properly, then you arrive at the solution, even if you don't know what the solution is up front. So I think
Exactly.
that's, yeah.
So I try to distance myself. Of course, emotionally as a human being, I have certain biases, but I try to see this. Sometimes I tell my students, I say, imagine you're an extraterrestrial anthropologist or sociologist. You come to planet Earth, you see this problem, and you're completely detached because you're not human, you're extraterrestrial. You still have empathy, compassion, but you don't pick a side, whatever, and then you try to solve the problem. So imagine that. So how I developed it is I first developed a general theory of how to solve problems. By the way, the justification for the general theory was not Israel-Palestine. It was at the time when President Bush decided to invade Iraq. And basically he said, well, he justified the invasion of Iraq ultimately for democracy. And I didn't agree to that. I mean, I'm all for democracy and freedom of all peoples in the world. I don't believe that. I'm not saying it's easy. And also we Westerners, we didn't have democracy in the past, we learned, but I completely reject the idea, but the blacks or the Arabs or the browns or the Slavs or the Chinese are incapable of democracy. No, I mean, they would have to learn as well, just as we had to learn. But they're not incapable of it. It may be more or less difficult, but there is no inherent reason why. There are historical, cultural reasons why some cases may be more or less difficult, but we can overcome this. So I basically decided, well, I'm against going to war or on those premises, but at the same time, I would like somehow, and I am for the Iraqi people to be free and choose their own destiny. But again, I didn't know what to do, how to do it. So I tried to come up with a general theory. This is how we do in physics. Well, general theory of how to do it, because I'm not an expert and I don't speak Arabic or Hebrew, whatever. I know history stuff. But anyway, I tried to come up with a general theory, and I came up with general theory. I won't go into that. We can do this another time. And I came up with some kind of process what to do in the case of Iraq, but we'll leave that aside. And it's only later I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. I came up with a general theory. Now, what is a general theory? The general theory is how to solve political problems with democratic tools, democratic solutions. That's kind of the definition of what I was trying to do. And I called it, for whatever reason, democracy engineering. So democracy engineering is the design or the concept of political solutions based on democratic tools or concepts or ideas. That's what it is. And it's not easy. Nobody said it's easy. And the thing most people don't understand is that democracy is not a static thing. There are hundreds of tools, democratic tools, and their principles. And so all those tools can be used. It's like if you're a doctor, you have many kind of tools. You don't have just one tool. It's obvious. So in a sense, democracy engineers are like doctors of the political body. So after I had developed this general tool, I thought, oh, interesting. Now I want to test it. It's like a theory. You design a theory of, I don't know, why black holes exist, or if there's about dark matter or dark energy in the cosmos, whatever, you're a physicist, or about some particle. But then you have to test it. You take your theory, you try to test it on some problem. So I thought, well, what's a tough problem? What's a tough problem that people basically say cannot be solved? I thought, Israel-Palestine. Oh, that's a tough one. So I had no expectations. I didn't know what the result was, but my theory is like a black box. And if you know how to use it, you just feed in the data in the black box. You kind of turn the box and you see what comes out. So that's what I did. And I thought, wow, that's interesting.
Back to the bird's eye view of what something like that would look like.
Okay, so the basic idea is, as I said before, we need to have a process whereby the people negotiate the peace. Now, how can that be done? Well, if we were God, what would we do? If we were God, we would put, let's say, the 5 or 6 million people on both sides. We'd put them in a big room around a big table. We would let them hash it out. We would give them all the food and drink they want. And we would kind of lock the door, and we wouldn't let them out until there's like a white puff of smoke, like the popes came out, until they agreed to some solution. And they would hash it out. Of course, since we're God, we would magically prevent violence from happening, but at least they would be in the same room. They would negotiate. But of course, this is impossible. We cannot put 10 million, 12 million people in the room. But how do we do this? Well, first, let's see how does it happen today? Today, we have 2 or 3 people in a smoke-filled room who are the diplomats who try to negotiate a peace. So at one extreme, we have, let's say, 10 million people or 12 million people negotiating peace. On the other extreme, we have 12 people negotiating the peace. Those are the 2 extremes. And now we are, in fact, at the 12 people extreme, right today. This is how diplomacy works. And sometimes the 12 people come down to 2 people, which is crazy. 2 people, each one representing 5 or 10 million people, or 5 or 6 million people, whatever it is. So how do we do it? Well, we should try to get a process which is close as possible to the people's side rather than to the diplomatic side. Now, if you look at how many degrees of separation are there between the diplomats and the people, if you look at that, well, the first thing is that diplomats, whom do they report to? They report to the foreign minister. That's normal. The foreign minister reports to whom? Well, reports to, let's say, the president or the prime minister. But if there's an agreement, even if we imagine that they agree, then the president or the prime minister, they have to get, first of all, they have to get members of their own political faction to agree, right? On either side, whether it's the Israeli-Palestinian, each leader has its own faction. So the leader has to get his own political faction in the cabinet to agree. So that's a 3rd degree of separation. Once the leader gets his own faction to agree, and presumably he has a majority in the cabinet, of course, he still has to get, and this is also very much true in Israel, where you have coalition governments, he has to get other members of his own coalition to agree, right? The other members of the cabinet, so other members of his own coalition. It's a 4th degree. Now note that because of the politics, we still are not done. We're still far away from the actual people agreeing. Now, even if you have his own cabinet agreeing, it doesn't mean that the entire coalition, the entire political coalition from which this cabinet, his cabinet stems, will agree. You still have to convince the rest of your coalition. That's like the 5th step. Once you've convinced your coalition, you have to convince then, let's say, the rest of the people, the parliament at large. Okay? That's the 6th step. We're at 6. And then you have let's say the 2 parliaments agree. Okay, if the 2 parliaments agree, that's good. But still, obviously, you still have to have the people to agree. So between, let's say, the diplomats and the people, you have 7 degrees of separation. Imagine, let's be generous. Imagine that there's a 50-50 chance, that at every step the people agree, which I think is less 50-50, but imagine 50-50. So the diplomats, to the foreign minister, to the president, prime minister, to his own cabinet coalition, to the cabinet, to the entire coalition, to the parliament, to the people. 50-50 chance. Half. If you multiply that, all those probability of success, we come at the end to a probability of 0.4% of success, because every step of the way you have to convince a broader group. So ideally, we should try to skip as many steps as possible and jump to the step closest to the ultimate people. What is a step closest to the ultimate people? It is the democratically elected representatives of the people, the parliaments. So the idea, in its simplest form, in its crudest form, the Mark I concept, is that instead of the diplomats negotiating in secret in a smoke-filled room, you're going to have the parliaments negotiating the peace. Now, the parliaments, in this particular case, is 120 people in the Knesset, about 120 people, let's say about 250 people. 250 people representing about 10 million people, it's a much better ratio of person to representation compared to the other ratio. And if they can agree they can work through the process. We can design a process where they can negotiate. And if we design it in a smart way, which means in a transparent way, so that everybody can see what's happening, this is a way then that the people can vicariously participate. Now, they can also participate in the fact that they elect them. Now, this is the second version of the concept. I do not suggest to take the existing elected politicians because they're elected for another reason. I suggest to have special elections on both sides, special elections to elect representatives of both people at parity, half-half, the exact number, and that those representatives come into a democratic assembly. Now you can call it binational parliament or people's assembly, or call it whatever is, doesn't matter what you call it, but others can, people on the ground. I'm just making a suggestion, then it's up to the Israeli-Palestinian people to decide. They can call it whatever they want to decide. But the idea is that there are special elections. Now, this is Mark II. This is the second version of the concept. Now, Mark III is that in addition to having, let's say, the normal politicians being elected, because of the way that the politics are today, because of the electoral system and so forth, we should try to design the process in such a way that the result is not hostage to the particulars of right now of how the system works. So the idea is that in addition to the normal politicians, which let's say are about 250, we elect other people, let's say another 250 people. The exact number will have to be negotiated, of course, but let's say generally another 250 people, that those people, they represent civil society according to different caucuses or electoral colleges. So, and the exact electoral colleges can be negotiated. So for instance, one of them can be that all the trade unions, the trade unions are very powerful on each side, that Histadrut. In Israel, there's a confederation of the General Confederation of Palestinian Trade Unions on the other side. They could, for instance, each have a certain number of representatives. So people can elect, if they are a member of a trade union, they can elect. Then on the other side, the business confederations, whatever they are, the business confederations can elect some representatives. Then you can have maybe youth organizations can elect representatives, or maybe simpler students in both sides can elect a number of representatives, 5, 10, it will have to be decided. Also, another group which will be maybe not elected but selected, but anyway, would be the religious representatives, could be elected or selected according to their own rules, because religion, they're not the same as another group. So it could be that they're appointed by whoever the religious leader is. So the religious communities could have some representation. And I think that's important. I think it's important. Then we could also have, for instance, celebrities in the arts field, because they are often people in the arts have a more broader, more humanistic view, more tolerant view, and it can be writers, it can be musicians, whatever they are. And then maybe also singers, popular singers. I mean, if they want to, if they don't want to, there's nothing, but maybe they will, maybe they will. Then you can also have a college of, let's say, athletes. Athletes can be very popular. They're usually popular figures, and people can feel represented by an athlete. So this is just examples of the civil society groups that could each elect or select their own representatives. So that's Mark III. And then Mark IV, I think the one which I would tend to prefer, is that you also have the mayors of the largest cities, the top 10 or 12 or 15 cities on both sides. Because mayors, they are politicians, they are elected, but and I'm not sure the details of election on both sides, but they have some political responsibilities. And the mayors often, because they're not a national level, they're more pragmatic. And so they also suffer often the consequences of the national politicians' decisions. So in the end, my ideal proposal would be to have about half the normal politicians, the normal national politicians, then the mayors, number of mayors, both sides, and then the rest, civil society, different colleges that would have to be negotiated.
I think you illustrated well how there's such an upstream process in the case of diplomatic negotiations, and how everything is basically, there's a lot of obstacles, especially in a democracy like Israel. You have coalitions, and in most cases the more extreme or fringe elements are the ones that hold more power and threaten the coalition in a way that skews everything to the extremes rather to than into the center. But this is just in the case of democracy. In the case of totalitarian situations such as Hamas or so, that then you don't even have that. You have like a bunch of people who hijack the entire rest of the population's agendas to their own ideological view.
Yes, correct. But so you might ask the question, well, how can this be implemented on the ground in this situation? Well, I think that there is, if we look at the Palestinians, they are very educated and cultured. And of course, there are some people who are, whom I don't agree personally with their cultural views or religious or political views, of course. But if we compare to, the question is, are they capable of conducting democratic election and electing people? Is there a will? I believe there's a huge pent-up demand within Palestinian society for this. In fact, observers, people, they know this. Palestinians themselves, they know this. They want, they're not happy about the fact that there have not been elections for a while. And you have to remember that Hamas itself was elected, but it wasn't elected to have absolute power. Just like Hitler wasn't elected. People say, oh, democracy brought Hitler to power. No, it's not true. Democracy allowed Hitler to be elected in the parliament, and then he staged a coup from within the parliament to take total power. That's the situation. That's what happened. That's what happened many times. Hamas was elected, and they actually claim it. They're not against elections because their whole legitimacy depends on election. So they're elected, but then there was a feud between them and Fatah, and they basically took power in the Gaza Strip. So if you allowed the Gazans to freely vote, some might vote for Hamas, but I would say the overwhelming majority would vote for new people, for different people. And so obviously, if you offer, the beauty of this, that if you want people to change, they have to have some kind of, they have to see that there's a political horizon. If they see, oh, here's a process where I will be able to participate, where I will have multiple votes. You know, in different countries, like in Germany, you have multiple votes. You vote you vote for a general list, and then you vote for a more local list. So you have different kinds of votes. Here, people have different votes depending on their status, of course. If, for instance, if they're a trade union member, they would also vote for the trade union representatives. I'm just giving an example. So why do we allow different votes? Because in reality, remember what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a body which resembles most closely the actual people of Israel and Palestine. The actual people of Palestine and Israel. The normal political process does not reflect the granularity, all the details of the people. If somebody, let's say, I don't care about normal politicians, but I do care about a football star, and I do work and so forth, then if I can elect my favorite football star or soccer star in the US, vote for them, or elect my favorite trade union representative, then I'm still part of the process. I'm still part of the process. So that's why, in reality, people have different hats. That's why we allow different colleges to represent as close as possible. The assembly has to represent as close as possible the reality on the ground of the people. Then I'm sure that the Palestinian people, they will say, yes, we want representation. And we want representation, and we want to elect our own people. They will not allow Hamas to kind of say, oh, we're going to appoint the people. No, they will not allow that. It's just not going to happen. They will not allow that. Even before, by the way, 7th October, they wouldn't have allowed it. The only reason I believe that Hamas, and that's an aside, has so much power is that because there was no alternative to Hamas. Well, first of all, they didn't allow an alternative themselves. Hamas didn't allow alternative, political alternative in the Gaza Strip. Also, Israel did not really support an alternative to Hamas. So, like the PA was never given the support which the PA should have represented the entire Palestinian people, but they didn't have the power and the support they should have had to do so. So they were discredited in the eyes of many Palestinians. They are discredited. That's why it's important to not to have only the politicians. And besides, if people are elected today, I'm sure that the old guard on both sides would not be elected. Now, a few might be, but I'm sure that the people on both sides would elect new blood, because it's been the same leadership on both sides for years and decades, and people are just fed up of the old leadership on both sides. I mean, some people still support them, but still, most people are just fed up. So this would create a new dynamic. This would create a new dynamic. Now, you might say, okay, so how do we get to the point of the election? This is very important, because we have to see there's a step-by-step process. What is the first step? The first step is to talk to civil society on both sides and just say, hey, here's an idea, here's a political horizon, here's an idea how the people of Palestine and Israel can negotiate, can have their voice heard. Please grab the idea and spread the idea within your societies to spark an open debate within both societies. And then to put pressure, because for it to happen, by the way, the governments have to agree. Both governments have to agree. What do they have to agree? They have to pass a law, the same law in Israel and Palestine, which basically says, there will be elections on such a date. Those are the conditions of the elections. It'll be the same conditions on both sides, okay? And the election will be to a popular assembly, democratic assembly, called whatever we want to call it, half-half. And the mandate of the assembly will be just one thing, a unique thing. So this will be a one-time assembly. In the future, if Israel and Palestine want to do different thing, more, whatever, it's up to them. But the mandate of this assembly will only be one. They will be limited, but ambitious, though ambitious. It will be to negotiate a robust peace treaty, to arrive at a final status agreement and to solve all problems. And that's the only purpose of this assembly. So the governments have to agree. Now you might say, oh, but Troy, the governments will never agree. The governments will, I believe they will agree, because the people are so fed up on both sides that they will want to take, in a sense, power back into their own hands. This is the closest possible to taking power back into your own hands, because as we said before, you cannot put 10 million people in the room. You can put 500 people in the room. For instance, the European Parliament, which sits just a kilometer away from where I stand, it's nearly 800 people. Okay, that's maybe a lot. US Congress is less than 500 people, whatever. But the point is, you can have a few hundred people in a room. That's manageable. That's manageable. You cannot have millions in a room, or even thousands. When you get to congresses where you have 3,000 or 4,000, like in some countries, like China. No, this is for show. This is unmanageable. But a few hundred is manageable. So the second step will be the agreement, the negotiation of this one-page law, or maybe a few-page law, which says we will have elections on the same day to elect representatives in this manner, to elect or select representatives, and they will then meet, and then you have to work out the details, how and where they meet and so forth. That's a separate thing. And their mandate will be to come up with a peace treaty. Now, one of the things that I believe should be in this law, and this also answers the extreme, because what you said before about extremists is very important. I believe, according to, this was before October 7th, but the situation is changed, but I still believe that it will calm down. At least before that, there was a majority on both sides for peace. Now, and still there's a majority on both sides for peace. Now, they don't think peace is possible according to, maybe they still hate each other. They hate each other, yes, but they still want to have peace. If there was a credible way of making peace, I think the polls would change. So imagine that there's a law. I mean, we can see this in the US or even in France, where I am. If you had 70% of Congress or Parliament which voted on a law, people would say, oh my God, it's a landslide, right? Landslide if a law passes with 70% vote, right? But because there is no political entity, no political process, no political mechanism to give voice to the majority that does want peace on both sides, that's why the extremists on both sides control the situation, because there is no mechanism for, as you say, the center to express its voice. So this process gives a voice to the center, to the majority, in fact. It's the majority of people want peace, and the majority of people want to negotiate a peace. So we're giving voice to them. So how do we also another way of making sure that the people are represented is to do what in France we have a new law which says that every electoral list of parliament has to be half men, half women. So if the first and alternating man and woman, you can start with a man or woman, doesn't matter, but then you have to alternate. So in the end, you come with pretty much equality between men and women in the assembly. I believe this should be a feature of this assembly, because women have been well, first of all, they've been victims. We have seen now, they've been huge victim of this conflict for many, many years. Men also, but women have been. And women's voice are not being heard. Women's voice are not being heard. And women have a different psychology than men. And if you have, I believe if you have an assembly where you have 50% women and 50% men, that will change the dynamic. And I believe that they will be able to, it's not going to solve all the problems, but it doesn't matter. It will be able to better function and to better negotiate and to better do this, as I said, the psychological process, because it's a psychological process. So by the way, so this will be the second step after the election, by the way. You might say, what's the next step? After the election, after the law, then let's say you have 3 months of campaigning. Now think about it in practice. The laws have been passed on, I'm just going to say September 1st, 2024. Then there is, and they say that the election should be on December 1st, 2024. There are 3 months, September, October, November. September to November, there is an electoral campaign on both sides for people to elect their representatives. So what's going to happen? You're going to have a huge public debate. Now notice, you had a big public debate in the first stage with civil society pushing and lobbying for the governments to agree. So the first public debate. Then you have the governments negotiating, and the governments during that period of time, there's also a public debate, right? It's a second public debate. Then you have another public debate. When I say public debate, a societal debate throughout society. The third occasion for the societal debate within the campaigning, the election campaigning on both sides. Everybody's going to say, I won't be elected because I think I'm the best one to be able to represent you in this peace assembly. So you notice every step of the way, we're doing the opposite of what the secret, opaque, non-transparent diplomatic process is. We're making an open, transparent, public process at every step of the way. Then you have the election, let's say over a day or 2 days, a weekend, whatever. And then once you have the election, it takes a few months to set up the assembly, of course, because that takes, you have the mechanics of setting up the assembly. And then the assembly starts to work. And of course, when the assembly starts to work, its work is public. Now, of course, there'll be lots of negotiations in the corridors. Of course, it's normal. But one of the key things is that you're going to have like the equivalent of C-SPAN. You're probably going to have more journalists from all around the world, more TV stations from Japan, from Russia, from the US, from Europe, from Brazil, from South Africa, from all around the world. You can have journalists. You're probably going to have more. I'm guessing you're going to have more accredited journalists to this peace process than you're going to have actual representatives of the peace process. If you only have 500 representatives, I'm sure there'll be thousands of accredited journalists. Maybe not throughout the time, but and then you'll have an incredible political reality show where you will see within a single room the political representatives of the Israeli and the Palestinian people negotiating, talking, addressing the issues, bringing experts. Now, how they do it, of course, in practice, what will they do? They will elect 2 presidents, co-presidents, one from each side. They will elect vice presidents. So there'll be like a bureau of the assembly, which is normal standard parliamentary stuff. In fact, the parliamentary minutiae will serve to reduce the passions because everybody is there'll be commissions set up. They will decide their commissions. One commissions might be on the borders. One commissions might be on water and the environment. One commission might be on economics. One commission might be on security and so forth. So there's going to be lots of different parliamentary commissions, right? Just like in any parliament, in any Congress. And then every member will be a member of some commissions. They'll have committee assignments. They will have to set up an office. So, and this, you know what's going to happen? Many people who were doing like violent stuff before, they will seek to recycle themselves into this peaceful parliamentary jousting because they will notice that now the battlefield has become the parliamentary arena. Now, I predict there will be I'm sure there will be at times fistfights in this peace assembly. But excuse me, fistfights are nothing compared to bombs and missiles, right, and rockets. So people should not think, oh my God, this is not kumbaya, everybody's going to love each other. No, I'm not saying people are going to love each other. I'm saying that this is the best way to work through the issues of the conflict, and so that people, and it will take time. Now you might say, how long will it take? I think it will take between 6 months to a year, which is not a long time for something which has lasted decades. We can also talk about the cost. I haven't estimated the cost, but the cost is going to be much less than, let's say, $1 billion. $1 billion is going to be way over budget for this, even if you consider translation and security and office for everybody, and everybody has so many square meters, and so everything's going to have to be, by the way, very. They may have to build a new building. I don't know, but the point is that the cost will be minimal compared, I think the war now has already cost like 100 billion. And what have all the wars cost since the beginning? Trillions. I mean, what is the advantage of peace? It's in the trillions, right? So
Right.
even if we spend 1 billion, and I'm sure, I don't think it'll be 1 billion, but whatever, this is cheap.
Troy, there's two big challenges that people will bring up. First of all, the first one would be how do you make a free election possible in a place that's ruled by a totalitarian gang? And then, second of all, how do you prevent them from coercing and threatening the candidates that are selected from acting independently?
Well, ultimately, you can only fight bad things through transparency. Whoever you think are the bad guys, first of all, they don't think they're the bad guys, and other people might think they're the bad guys, and and they always want to, and they themselves say they're the good guys. Everybody thinks they're the good guys, and so the only weapon we have on all sides is that the rules have to be completely transparent. And for instance, there will be immunity. So the law will say that there's complete immunity, like in all parliaments. You cannot be sued for what you say in a parliament or in Congress, right? There will be immunity for whatever you say. Maybe in this particular case, we have to extend it to the family of the people. Sure, if that's necessary, then we extend to the family of people. Now, everybody, by the way, every representative is also going to get a stipend. The stipend is going to be the same.
Troy, but who would protect them?
The society itself protect. See, the situation we are trying to, you cannot assume that in this new environment that they will be the same. In fact, you can safely assume it will not be the same, and society will not accept any kind of totalitarian coercion. They will not accept it. Even today, we see that there is resistance against any kind of totalitarian or imposition, even today, but in a different environment,
right?
Where
Well,
the people have hope. They will simply not accept it. And another thing is that any group which, I mean, the rules will be the same. The rules will be the same like in any parliament. I'm from France. If there's a parliament, a military group, for instance, cannot run candidates for parliament in France, which I assume is the same in every parliament in the world. You cannot have. So, for instance, you could not have like the situation like in Lebanon where Hezbollah runs candidates. That where they have the private army, that wouldn't be allowed. Okay, you'd have to have very clear rules that only groups that are not themselves armed groups can participate politically. Now you may say, yes, but there may be an offshoot, a political offshoot, which is connected to an armed group. Well, let's look at some real example of other examples in the past that can inspire us. I think there are three historical examples that this suggestion is based on, and not in any order of importance. But one of them is the idea of the European Parliament itself. The European Parliament is a democratically elected supranational organization, parliament, which you can argue credibly is the linchpin of the European Union. If the European Parliament did not exist, the European Union would have disappeared a long time ago, because people would not trust it and people would not feel that they have a voice in the European Union. So that is a very important precedent. It's a supranational democratic parliament. Here, it's the same thing. It's a supranational democratic parliament. Not with, and we, by the way, we have 27 states, but this would only be 2 states. So, I mean, it's much easier. The second is another process where participation of the people was able to bring peace, is the constitutional process in South Africa. Now, most people don't remember, but after the end of apartheid, there was a real many people were really scared there will be a civil war, a bloody civil war between the Afrikaners and the blacks.
Mhm.
The Afrikaners were afraid the blacks would come to and they're going to kill them. They're going to do a genocide out of revenge. And it's only because Nelson Mandela, of his personality, he said, no, we're not going to have revenge. We're not going to kill all the whites. We're going to have a new South Africa where everybody's equal. Okay? People forget this. The second element which prevents civil war. Now, the first one, everybody knows what Nelson Mandela did pretty much, including in the movie Invictus. But the second one is that there was a process, a popular process, to create the new constitution of South Africa. This is, and there's a paper which can be downloaded on the U.S. Institute of Peace, which people can look up. It's called, I think it's called Democratic Constitution Making. It's a unique thing. The South Africans realized that if we want the new South Africa not to descend into anarchy and war and chaos, we must create a process where people feel a stake in the new constitution. So they basically had a roadshow. They presented the new constitution, and they had literally millions of comments and inputs from all over South Africa over a period of several months to the new constitution. So this helped to quiet down the hatred, because the people, and this is well known in psychology, if people have a voice, they're less violent. And it's, in the end, violence is another type of voice. So if you don't allow peaceful voice, you'll have a violent voice in a sense. So the people were allowed this voice in South Africa. Therefore, they were able to feel that it was their constitution. The third example, which is closer in time and which is very relevant here, is Northern Ireland. How did Northern Ireland, after decades of war between Catholic and Protestants, which is like Israelis and Palestinians or Jews and Arabs, how did Northern Ireland, and you had terrorism, people maybe forget that, but there was terrorism. And just like there is, people say there's terrorism in the Middle East, right? So how did people end the conflict? They did it through a supranational, in a sense, a super community assembly, both sides, equality, half Catholic, half Protestants, and they elected a president and so forth. I think they rotated, whatever, but and this democratic assembly, which was the condition for peace. If you hadn't had the democratic assembly, whatever other accords you had, the Good Friday Accords, would not have worked. So it was, again, democracy, popular participation, which allowed Northern Ireland to have peace, just like it's democracy and popular participation, which has allowed peace in the European Union. And it's just like it's democracy and popular participation, which allowed peace in South Africa.
The crux of the matter is here that we're creating an assembly. We're creating an assembly that is joined by the two factions, and the purpose of the assembly is to bring a solution to this thing. So people who are opposed to the mere idea of creating a solution are going to exclude themselves, shoot themselves in the foot in a way, and not be part of this. And if there are any that are opposed to the idea of an agreement or a settlement, and are going in just to be disruptors and sabotage the process, they're going to primarily be sabotaged themselves by the majority of people who are not gonna sit by and just let them negate the very process that everybody is sitting in for.
Yes, again, we have to see that those people, let's take real example of Ireland and Europe. In both cases, we have some people who are against the process. In fact, we had Brexit, as you know, and we had some people who are against even the idea of the European Union, who were inside the parliament and who were inside the European Parliament and who were lobbying and basically spitting on the idea of the European Union and lobbying for Brexit. And Brexit happened. But they are inside, and we cannot, first of all, we cannot exclude anybody based on a particular idea. The only idea we can exclude people on is, and it's not even an idea, is if you are yourself literally saying, we will conduct armed struggle, then this, yes, this you cannot have. Now, some people will say, yes, but the Israeli state itself is committing atrocities, so why don't we exclude the Israeli state? But people don't understand. The Israeli state is not itself a party. I mean, is not a member of the parliament. It is parts of Israeli societies and its political parties within Israel. You see the difference? That because if people say, for instance, what happened in Ireland is that the IRA, which was a terrorist organization, they decided we will enter the political process and we renounce terrorism, right? But what happened? As you pointed out, there are some people who disagree. And there was a faction which disagreed, which exited the IRA. They called themselves the real IRA. And they continued creating terrorist attacks. So we do have to expect, what do I expect? Is that, assuming that Hamas exists or doesn't exist, we don't know that. But even if it did exist, or some people who were a member of Hamas, whatever, some people are going to say, well, now that there is this new process, we have a chance to negotiate peace, then I will, and people have to remember that even Hamas accepted at one point in time the premise of that Fatah would negotiate a peace treaty with Israel, which contradicted the fact that they would never negotiate with Israel. But remember also one thing, Hamas said they will not negotiate with Israel. They never said they will not negotiate with people, with political parties, with specific individuals, Israelis. And this is the key point that we have to keep on remembering. We are separating the state and the people. Everything we do here is based on the people, not the state. The state represents the people, but this process is not for the state. The state is taken out of the process. The states do not anymore control and negotiate. That's the old process, the old paradigm. That's today's paradigm, where today the states, people representing the states, negotiate. Here, the only role of the state is simply to say, okay, we agree to a process in which the people negotiate. That's the only thing. The state, the only role of the state here is not itself to negotiate, but to simply agree to the framework within which the people will negotiate. So it's the PA will not be in the assembly as such. The Israeli state will not be in the assembly as such. The government of the Gaza Strip, which whatever you call the Hamas, will not be there. Now, there could be individuals who are in this government who then go out of the government, who run within another political platform. Yes, but then it's not the political entity as such. It is not the government of Gaza or the government of the West Bank or the government of Israel. That's a very important thing to remember. It's never the government. The governments simply agree to the framework. So what happened, and what's probably going to happen here, you're right, some people will decide they don't want to participate. Now, I'm guessing that once it gets going, the political momentum would be so high and the enthusiasm for this would be so high that the huge majority of people will say, oh my God, they will change their mind. And remember also that there are several steps. There's the first civil society lobbying, then there's government negotiation for the law, then there is the political campaigning, then there is the election, the assembly preparation, and then there's assembly. Every step of the way, people, there'll be the intensity of the public discussions will be such that many people who were before quote unquote extremists, who many of them were not really extremists, they were simply drawn to extremism because they had no choice. You know, it's like the Syrian people. Most Syrians, they didn't support Islamist groups, but Bashar al-Assad was very smart. Bashar al-Assad basically said, everybody who's against me is an Islamist terrorist. So he managed to taint, and then people in the West, useful idiots in the West, bought this propaganda and said, oh yeah, so we cannot support the Syrian Democrats to free themselves, because if we support the Syrian Democrats, we are really supporting Islamist totalitarians. No, the Islamist totalitarians were a minority. It's only because then the Democrats saw they were not being supported, the people reluctantly started to join the Islamists. Al-Nusra, which was the Syrian arm of Al-Qaeda and so forth, and later even Daesh. It's out of desperation. It's not because they love Daesh, they love Al-Nusra, or now they love Hamas. No. People usually support such groups, they're not the same, but or such groups out of desperation. If there is a competition, if there is a political horizon, I'm sure all those groups, any extreme groups on both sides will lose popular support, and they will splinter, and many of them, there will be new political elements coming from them, because what will happen, they will say, oh my God, this assembly is going to make a peace treaty. If we're not there, if we cannot influence a peace treaty, it's coming, and we cannot derail it. They will, by the way, some will try to derail it, even with terrorist attacks. It's important to understand that. The real IRA, that's what they did, by the way. The real IRA committed terrorist acts to try to derail the peace. So I expect that there will be terrorist acts of extreme groups to derail the process. Everybody has to understand there is a risk, but this risk already exists now. The risk will be much less if there's a popular process, for the simple reason that who commits terrorist acts? You have to understand the psychology. It's individual people. Those individual people, they have families themselves. Even if they're brainwashed, they have families. And if they hear that, oh, there's a political process in which we have a voice, the society itself they will talk to their own members, and they will talk to their brothers and sisters and husbands and wives and relatives, and let's say, listen, don't commit any terrorist act. We have this chance now. At least wait to see what happens. We have a chance. We can vote. We can vote in a democratic process. We can elect whomever we want, and we can negotiate peace. You can always go back later if you don't like it. You can always do a terrorist attack later. I mean, that sounds very callous, but in a sense, yes, you could say, but don't do a terrorist attack now. I mean, we're in the middle of an election, for God's sakes. You want freedom. You all want freedom for yourself, for our people. So let our people because you are going to shoot us in the foot if you do this. So I predict two things. There will be some terrorist attacks, but there'll be many less than otherwise, because automatically, and this is a law of human nature, it's human psychology, history, and politics, if the people can express themselves peacefully, there is less violence.
We're currently in a very, very difficult situation, past carnage on all sides, as in regards to Gaza, and how does one come back from that, and is it even possible to? And personally, I don't see how this whole process would be possible with Hamas still gripping power. Even if it is possible, it would be so much more difficult. So what are your thoughts on this?
When you have a process like this idea is based on a very simple conclusion about human nature. People change. Part of the big problem today is that on both sides, people are thinking, oh my God, look, we hate them or they hate us. Of course. For instance, people on the Israeli side will say, look, the majority of Palestinians, they support Hamas. They don't condemn Hamas for October 7th. It's the proof that they're all bad and we have to kill them. We have to. No, it's not. That's ridiculous. That's stupid. That's just, it doesn't, they don't understand human nature. The reason why today Palestinians support Hamas, it's not that they support Hamas as a, in all their policies. They simply see, they think, oh, nobody helped us for all this time. And also there was a lot of political progress being made between the Arab states, because of the Abraham Accords, Arabs in Israel. Nobody's talking about us anymore. We're going to be forgotten. And so what do? So they're even more desperate now than they were before. So they didn't see any horizon. They didn't see any issue. They saw no light at the end of the tunnel. So then somebody comes along, and most Palestinians, they hate the policies of Hamas. I mean, the religious policies and so forth. But somebody comes along and takes like a missile and boom, blows a hole in the brick wall that was at the end of the tunnel, which was blocking the light, so to speak, and suddenly, and kills a lot of people in the process. And suddenly they see, in fact, maybe now it's not that they see suddenly light at the end of the tunnel, but suddenly everybody talks about them again. Maybe for the wrong reasons, but suddenly this problem is back on the agenda. I had predicted this before, by the way. That's why I always said the Abraham Accords are kind of a trap, and they're not. They will not bring peace, and you cannot. In fact, and the Israelis who thought that they were a great thing, they didn't read the fine script, the line. They forgot. They didn't see. I mean, the statements were obvious. Saudi Arabia and the other countries said it. We will only eventually have peace. We will really establish relations once you solve peacefully the Palestinian problem. They said it many, many, many times. But the Israelis who didn't want to listen, they didn't listen. They say, oh my God, this is great. They were kind of blinded with their own thing. And boom, we had this strategy happen, which could have been avoided. If there had been some political process. Now, what can happen now? How do we do it now? You say, oh my God, now there's been so much carnage on both sides. Yes. And the Palestinians will say that there's been much more carnage on the Palestinian side now because of the 6 months war. But irrespective of that, irrespective of the past, what is the solution moving forward? Either you have basically war, eternal war, or you have a political process. Peace cannot come by, there could be peace by killing the other side completely. That's crazy. You can't kill the other side, okay? You can't. And you can't get rid of the other side. Also Israelis think we're just going to get rid of Palestinians, put them somewhere where? No, it's crazy. And the Palestinians think we're going to eject all the Jews from Israel. That's also crazy. No, never going to happen. So in the end, you have to have a political process. The only question is, what will the political process look like? That's the only real question. And so we come back to the beginning. Either it would look like the traditional process where you have a bunch of diplomats in a smoke-filled room, secretly negotiate. We've done this. We've been there. We've done this many times. It didn't work. First of all, it didn't work. And there are practical and theoretical reasons why it will not work. We know it will not work. That was the beginning of our talk. Because people are traumatized, and you cannot solve the trauma just by two guys in a room signing a peace treaty. That peace treaty will not be accepted by the people. Never. Or the chance is like quasi-nil. In fact, this is what has happened the last 75 years, okay? So we have no choice but to have a political process. So then we come back to what I said now. What political process? Well, from first principles, as we've seen, and from our knowledge of human nature, the best political process we can design, there is no perfect process anyway. Perfection doesn't exist in the real world. People have to get rid of this fantasy. But the best possible process is one in which both sides negotiate in a democratic way, as we've discussed. Now, you say, coming back to Hamas situation now, I believe that the way to push this forward is, first of all, to speak about it to as many people as possible. I'm looking for people to some support to create a website, to describe it in detail, have it in Hebrew and Arabic, but also in French, English, German, Russian, Chinese, whatever. Secondly, one thing I didn't mention is that the whole process itself, by the way, I believe should not be paid by the Israeli-Palestinians. It should be paid by, let's say, the rest of the world, the foreigners. I mean, the U.S. gives a lot of money every year to Israel, and also indirectly, and to Palestine through UNRWA. But just to add a little bit of money to pay for this process, and it should not be just the U.S. It should be in the entire world, is a good investment. It's a great investment, and so it should not cost anything. On the contrary, it will be money going to the economy. On the Palestinian side, because it's about a 1 in 20 ratio, I think, in the GDP per capita between Israel and Palestine. As we said before, there's going to be a stipend for every representative. This means that if you have 250 Palestinian representatives, in practice, their stipend will fund not just their own, I mean, there's a stipend for their job, but they'll have a personal stipend, will fund their family. So we'll provide some kind of psychological material security also, which is very important. Because if your family is starving, how can you negotiate in a good frame of mind if your family is starving? You can't, right? So we'll have to support also the families of the representatives. And if some people run just for that reason, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Now you say, but what if Hamas is in power? It doesn't matter either. Because again, the dynamic that you start will be such that whatever extremist groups are there will lose power. Will lose power. I'm not saying they're going to disappear. I don't know if they're going to disappear or not, but they will lose influence and power if there is this democratic process, as we said, step by step. And I think one of the ways to start is with women's groups. And there are particular women's groups that I'm thinking of. There's one in Israel, one in Palestine. I think it's called Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun. There are two groups who are women who say, we want peace, we want our governments to negotiate peace, and they put pressure, they do lobbying. It was started on the Israeli side because they have more freedom, more money, and so forth, but now it's also constituted on the Palestinian side. And they're putting pressure on the governments to negotiate the peace. They do not say explicitly how to do it. They simply say, you must negotiate peace, okay? I believe that they are the best vehicle to start this civil society campaign in Israel and Palestine. Because, first of all, the women represent our, so to speak, cross-border, cross-party, cross-whatever. It doesn't matter whatever political party you're from, you have women in your family. And that's one thing. Secondly, the women, they have constituted themselves already in this organization, in these organizations. But they do not have, they don't have any specific ideas on how to do it. This is an idea which they can take ownership of, because it's an unbiased idea. It's not a pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian idea. In fact, the proposal is designed such a way that you can just swap the words Israeli and Palestinian in whatever text, and it will be the same. It's based on the same idea, completely symmetric. So, and by the way, this is also a way to accord some dignity to the Palestinians, because the Palestinians, of course, now the Israelis have much more wealth than the Palestinians and much more freedom and power than Palestinians. So it's hard to negotiate if you are much below, how do you negotiate? From a position of weakness, right? So this is a way also to bring it to parity. They will be the same law. They'll have the same resources in the parliament, each representatives. They'll have the same stipend. But because, as I said before, because of the levels are so much lower, I think 1/20 the same stipend means that they can support their own people, and which is good, which is very important, because maybe the sociological reality of the Palestinian or the Arabs is different than the sociological reality of many of the Israeli Jews, depending on whether Mizrahi or not, but in any case, because they have more extended families and so forth. So, but in a sense, it's good. It's good because they will have the resources to help their family as well. So I think the women are, I think, the key to jumpstart the process. The women can grab this, and they will have an interest in doing it because, as I said, the idea is that half of the representatives are women. So obviously the women have the greatest vested interest in pushing for this proposal. And so I think that's why I think that, and if you look at the leadership, by the way, whether it's Hamas, Fatah, or the Israeli government, it's nearly all men, right? Nearly all men.
Well,
yeah, if you look at the highest level of power, it's nearly all men. I mean, there might be maybe a couple of women in the cabinet, Israel cabinet, I'm not sure. But if you look at the war cabinet, it's men. And if you look at the Hamas leadership, it's men.
for sure.
And
Yeah.
the Fatah leadership, it's men. Okay. So you basically have, I don't know, 10, 20 men, basically. About 20 men who control the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here you have 500 people, 250 men, 250 women,
Right.
controlling, quote unquote, the situation. So this is how I think we don't have to worry about, we don't have to get rid of Hamas before. No, we have to project this idea, which is a positive idea, and extremists will lose power naturally, automatically, as the seed grows, as this positive seed grows. It will automatically displace the people who are more greedy or totalitarian or opaque or extremist.
Right. Troy, thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation, and to
Thank you.
let all of you guys know, we're going to bring you more of this. We intend to bring you more information and discussions on this topic here at Olive Roots. And so just subscribe and ring the bell and keep engaged. And hopefully we'll get something started here. Thank you, Troy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.